If you love someone and then suddenly, for example, if the wife is bringing another man in the house for whatever reason, a bit too often, maybe he's an electrician or something, but she seems to be inviting a bit too often, there's going to be a problem. In fact, there's going to be an issue. If the husband is bringing or speaking to a woman a bit too often, seems to be getting a bit too comfortable, it doesn't seem normal, then there's going to be a jealousy there. Because it's against the love aspect. Love needs to be pure in that sense. Unless it's decided in the case where a person has two wives, it's done and it's a done deal. It's done. You know. There's still going to be jealousy there, but at least it's a done deal and it's formal. It's understood. And it's allowed and it's formal, so it's allowed. But when it comes to any normal situation, just like the demand of that love that you have for each other requires that there's no pollution to that, there's no adulteration, there's no sidestepping, there's no there's nothing else that's going to become a hindrance. Now, imagine it. Let's talk about physical pleasures. How do physical pleasures feel? I mean, it's wonderful, isn't it? I mean, there's so much pleasure that you get from eating a dish that's supposed to be very pleasing. A nice hotel, nice restaurant. You know, living in a nice hotel for a few days with everything at your service, nice big rooms, you know, breakfast that is as big as this house, meaning breakfast hall that is as big as this house, you know, with different types of food that, you know, you can't even try everything, you know. So there is a certain pleasure. The pleasure of listening to a nice voice, the pleasure of intimacy, the pleasure of whether that be nice scenery, whatever it may be. The physically, you know, there's no denying that there's a pleasure in that. Whatever a person is pleased by and whatever a person gets their pleasure through, there's a great amount of pleasure. That's physical pleasure. And that's just an exterior aspect of pleasure where our limbs, our hands, if it's touch, our eyes, if it's seeing something, our ears, if it's about hearing something, and our tongue, if it's tasting something, is transferring the signals of that pleasure to our heart, and we feel so much pleasure. So imagine then if the pleasure of the heart is felt directly, then imagine how much that's going to be, because that's going to be directly. One parallel to that is that doing dhikr with the tongue is very important, but it's like taking a tablet in the way it will affect you. Whereas doing dhikr with the heart is like intravenous. So in that same kind of parallel, if we know the sheer amount of pleasure that we get from touching something, from hearing something, listening to something, seeing something, then imagine if directly the pleasure comes into the heart directly. But unfortunately, we never get to find that pleasure, to taste that pleasure. Otherwise, we'd probably forget all other pleasures. And now everything makes sense of the awliya Allah. That they seem to diminish every other type of pleasure. And you wonder why. I don't get a pleasure out of eating this great food. What's a big deal about it? You know, they don't seem to have the same kind of pleasures as we do. Because they've tasted something better. They know how to get that pleasure. So you can rationalize this whole concept. It's just realizing it. So if the pleasures of the limbs are to be felt, then imagine the pleasures of the heart. But because we've never tasted it, so how are we going to know about it? I mean, the simple example people give is that until a child doesn't mature, it has absolutely no idea what it means to be baligh, what it means to feel that sexual fulfillment, that feeling of sexual fulfillment it is. And Imam Ghazali, he writes that marriage and sexual intercourse in marriage is a realization, is an indication towards the pleasures of paradise. Because one of the highest levels of pleasure that people will have is sexual fulfillment. And they say that this is one indication of what kind of pleasure will be in paradise. It's momentary, but it's so great and so intense. And when in Jannah, it's going to be even more so. And I'm only saying this not to speak about sexual pleasure in particular, but it's to speak about the pleasure of the heart in general. And again, the sexual pleasure is just the pleasure of the limb. It's an external pleasure at the end of the day. Only when a person has tasted it, then he will want to call his Lord for hours and enjoy it. Because nowadays, if you're speaking to a beloved, you don't mind speaking for hours and hours and hours. Any time in the night, the call comes, text message. There's a certain feeling. The fluttering of the heart. Certain quivering and wavering inside. It's just a nice feeling.